So, welcome to the making a fantasy map in Blender commentary slash tutorial. I've actually sped up the original video by about 1000% because it's actually about 4 hours of continuous work and I've cut it down to 20 minutes, so it's going to go by a little bit fast. So I'm going to be pausing, unpausing this video from time to time just to make sure everything stays in good shape. I've also muted the original audio because you didn't need to hear my random collection of anime music and political podcasts, because that's what I listen to when I play with Blender, apparently. So let's get right into the news. Oh, no, that's cringy. So let's get right into it. So this is actually just my first attempt at, making a coastline. I eventually realized that this actually wasn't the most efficient way to do it. It's a lot of point pulling. It's a lot of... Just wait for it. I'll delete it eventually. There we go. Okay, so what I actually ended up doing was building a cube over the entire island map. And as you can see, it's a very kind of standard... Well, I guess it's not standard. It's a fantasy map that I made just for a personal project. I'll pull it up on screen. Here we go. And I actually made this in a little program called Incarnate, which is free online. It's actually pretty good for making D&D maps and stuff. I actually would recommend it. So this is what I actually decided to make in Blender. Going back to the video. So you can see I'm actually forming the coastline here, and I'm trying my best to actually work around all the little imperfections of the map itself, because it makes a more natural look. What I actually ended up doing was I took the cube and I subdivided it, which I did by pressing Alt-W and hitting subdivide. So that I did that manually. I know there's a modifier that lets you do it. There's the subdivide subsurface modifier, which actually lets you do that automatically. But in this case, I actually wanted more control over it, so I selected the whole cube and hit Alt-W and subdivided a bunch of times because I wanted a lot of points on the map, and also to create a kind of grid-like fashion. So what I'm doing here is actually I'm deleting parts that don't fit up with the island and then just forming the coastline out of the extra points. In the next video, I'll actually show you a better way to do it, but for the time being, this is just me experimenting with few things. This is the point where I kind of messed up a modifier and couldn't figure out what was going on, so I think I'm just trying to figure out what the heck is happening. I think I figured it out eventually. It was a weird kind of obscure setting that didn't make a lot of sense. I'm just deleting all this because it's unnecessary. So moving right along, kind of getting the coastline shaped. I'll eventually actually apply a subdivision subsurf modifier, which will be useful on later. I'll explain that a little bit more in a few minutes. So I'm just going to skip ahead. Okay, so here you see the entire... I'm just going to save. And there you see the entire map just in a very flat surface. So you see the coastline has been fully formed. And I've actually applied, in this case, a multi-resolution modifier, which actually I've ended up deleting. The multi-resolution modifier is actually used for sculpting, but I figured out later that I'll show you what I mean instead of just telling you. So see, this is where I try to sculpt, but notice how it's mirrored, and I tried to turn the mirroring off, couldn't figure it out, and decided I'd be better off just doing regular point pulling. So this is where I'm just going to apply your standard subdivision subsurface modifier and start making the mountains that you see on the map. And I didn't do it very precisely, per se. I did it in a way that looks more natural, it looks more randomly spread out. So you can see how it's popping out of the map, which is something you obviously don't get with regular 2D maps, and it's something that's actually really powerful in Blender. So I now you can see I actually start to shape the rivers that actually go through the. I try a bunch of things, and later I figure out that there's an easier way to do this. Okay, so what we've got here is I've made sure the subdivision subsurface modifier doesn't affect when I'm forming the rivers, which means that it'll be a little bit easier if I... the subdivision subsurface modifier has a bit of a tendency to warp the model, especially when you're working with it, so it's better to actually leave that off until you're ready to fully use it. So I'm forming more mountains, getting those kind of set up. There's kind of a hilly area around here that I want to show, so I'm creating kind of a hills and bumps. So actually forming up some of the terrain, which turned out really well. So you can see I'm actually forming a little island, turning this into an island, and making the river, or I guess it's more of a canal, actually, that wraps around this. So what I'm doing here is I'm getting all the points put in place, and then I'm going to actually... I'm not sure what I'm doing here, but eventually I'll be extruding the river down. So later I actually figured out that I put too many points here, and they were a pain in the ass to drag around. So eventually you'll see that I actually did a better job with that later on in the process. So now you see that I'm selecting the whole river, and I'm going to delete a few things first. Now I'm going to select the whole river. There we go. Or not. Come on. And I'm going to drag it down. And I'll pause it. You see how this actually makes a really nice looking indent, which actually gives a really good appearance of terrain. So you can see that here is a good example. See how this really looks contoured, and it's quite a nice effect actually, and I'm rather happy with how it turned out. And I'll do that for the rest of the rivers now that I've figured out the technique. So now I'm actually going to form around the lake, which shouldn't take that too long. It's a pretty simple formation. There we go. And I'm going to actually apply the same treatment to the lake as well, but not before modeling around that little island as well, because I still want that in the map. Okay, there we go. So I'm just going to select the whole lake, except the island, obviously. There we go. Drop it down, and you see how the lake's been formed in a way that actually makes it look like there's a bit of an indent there. Eventually that will hopefully be filled up with a water effect or something, but for now it just looks nice to have a bit of differentiation between the different land masses. So I actually got to work on the other river. I created a lot of excess points here, which I'm actually, in hindsight, I'm rather unhappy about, because it makes life a little bit difficult to work with if you've got so many points. But sometimes you want to do the loop cuts because they help you actually get the shape of the river, or it helped me get the shape of the river actually down right. It's kind of hard to explain, and it's something that you'll actually just have to figure out if you try to do something like this, with a river kind of being part of the map. You can kind of see what I'm trying to do here, but I eventually figured out it's easier to actually work in triangles instead of squares, and that's because it actually... I'll have to just point it out when it comes along, because it's not coming along right now because I didn't figure out the technique until later. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit just because, you know, getting the river all figured out and stuff isn't really all that important. So I started making this little side channel off the river, which is fine, not really all that spectacular. And then I selected the whole thing, dropped it down. There was a bit of a mix-up with a part of it, but I got that figured out. And just finishing off this river, moving everything down so we can get all the points in place. You see that big mass of points that I it was a huge mistake to have that many. I'm gonna actually try. I eventually just tried to get rid of them, but it was a bad scene. Here's me just trying to correct my mistakes again. So I'm actually gonna skip past this as well because it's a bit of a process that I underwent. It took me a while. There we go. So you can see that this kind of sub-pass has dropped the river. I'm creating a few more mountains, making a little pass here because it's in the, it's within the, and then trying to just clean up the river a little bit. There we go. That's a lot better, actually. And then just adding a little bit of contour to the map just so it looks all clean. So now you can see how this whole part of the map has been completed. I'll continue working on the rivers. You see how in here I'm pushing these points to the side? Later I'll actually figure out how to incorporate them into the river itself. I'll keep most of these in the center and actually utilize these points as well as whenever possible. And I think I'll have a good example of that coming up pretty soon. So you see what I did there? Instead of pushing all these points out of the way, I've actually incorporated them. See how it makes a bit of a triangle formation? I figured out how that makes the best possible technique because you're not pushing so many points aside and it doesn't make things as jumbled. I'll try to find a better example actually. Yeah, see what I just did there? So these points were actually pulled down to be part of the river. I'll play that again. So instead of moving them to the side now, I'm actually incorporating them, which makes it easier to make bends in the river in a lot of ways. So yeah, see I pulled this one down instead of pushing it out, and that one as well. So see now it's taking on a more triangular shape instead of more squares and rectangles. I think that really works best because it makes the whole model a little bit less crowded and less points to actually deal with in the end. So yeah, see what I did there? I pulled this one down instead of trying to make a new loop cut. I'm just trying to clear out some of these excess points and making new ones. Not the easiest thing in the world, but that was a mistake that was made early on. So those kind of mistakes, especially in Blender, are really hard to use. You can see I just eventually decided to suck it up and use them instead of trying to delete them. So a little bit more editing the mountains. I was trying to figure out exactly what I liked and didn't like about those. So yeah, now you see I'm using both squares and rectangles and triangles instead of trying to use just rectangles, which made life a lot easier. Now I'm kind of trying to create this little branch of the river, which actually branches off a few more times. So I'm going to actually cut this one and extrude it down so it just looks nice. So there's that big river channel that I just made, and now I'm just going to start branching off of it. Yeah, see, triangles. And that helps with the loops and the terms. Instead of trying to push everything out of the way, I just drag them over, and that really helps a lot. There we go, that's that path of the river done. Moving on to the next one. I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit because that is not exciting and you get the point. So now I'm just going to take all these, cut them down a little bit, make sure they line up with the original, with the big river, and then there we go. There's the main river channel here. And then there'll be another one cutting out around here as well, which will show up eventually. There we go. See, I'm working on that. Triangles, not squares. especially for those bends in the river, triangles. Use all the, don't ever push points out of the way if you can manage not to. That's very important, I found out, because it really helps in the end to not have too many points to worry about. See, I made another loop cut there just so I could actually handle that bend in the river. So now I'm just going to select it all, drag it down to the level of the rest of them, fill it out a bit. There we go. That looks good. This is the main. That was a pretty challenging thing because there's so many. So now there's so many branches to that. So now I moved on to the little inner lakes on the upper part of the island. Honestly, I don't think there's too much to say about these, to be honest. I realized that this one, Big Dong Island, actually was a little bit off kilter. I somehow got the map off kilter. I tried to undo it, as you can see, and I thought, oh crap, I actually undid all the river work, but it turned out in the end I just restored my backup save. Okay, so I decided to just roll with it and see how that's a little bit off kilter. I'll put it back for a minute. See how this is just a little bit off center? I wasn't happy about that, but it is what it is. I'm not trying to redo everything again. And then I decided to rework the shape of the river a little bit to make it not look like a dildo. And then just trying to connect all these little lakes together into one big thing. Here we go. Pull that down. And now you've got two lakes chained together by a small river. That's not too exciting, and I'm going to do that like 5 more times with rivers and stuff. So that's all I really had to say about the very basics of just map making, not buildings or anything, and scale and proportion, which is going to take a lot more time and effort, to be honest. You'll find that it's adding other things to this is going to be the next big challenge, especially foliage, because there's a lot of green space that you have to fill in. That's the big question. Are you going to fill it just with texture, or are you going to fill it with actual models of trees? And that's one thing I have yet to address in this model. And we'll see. I'll update this video or upload a new one about texturing the maps, along with my building of the world. The world building map is the world map's going to be a lot less detailed, except in parts where the world actually needs to be detailed. Like this is really, in terms of detail, it's high on the detail level. Whereas a big world map, you won't see all the small details anyways. So you only need details on the places you'll actually be zooming into, like this, which will be a main location in my game or whatever it is. Just smoothing out some things, making some little hills. There we go. And then there's a big wall that needs to be put in there as well, which I'm doing now. That's about it. I could have sworn there was another video doing these little islands as well. I can't find the file, so this is all you get for now. But it's more of the same. Like, I mean, you make the smaller islands, and it's very similar to this process, just on a smaller scale. So eventually I'll show off the world map that I built once it's done, because it's not done at the time of recording. It might be done at the time of upload. So I did this particular entry because it sort of ties into what we've been learning in interactive arts and science, which is great. I think that it ties in so well, because we've been talking about maps and making maps a lot in ISC. So so this is another way to do it. It's probably not the best way, and this is really just me experimenting with and playing around with map making. But I hope you've learned a few things, especially about those rivers. Those rivers are tricky. And always remember to use triangles, and also try to keep your points down, because your points are going to be a mess if you use too many, for sure. And actually pull up the map in Blender so you can see what I'm talking about just one more time. So here it is, the full completed thing with these small islands. So I'm just going to go into edit mode. See how many bloody points there are here? Like all of these. It's a mess. And I'll give you a quick sneak preview of my world map. See, this looks just as messy, but the points are more organized. See, they're in rows and in almost a grid pattern. They've been kind of thrown off by the coastline a bit, obviously, but they are in better shape than the other map. And you can see I've actually included the other map here as well. So you can see how that fits in with the rest of the world. The gray stuff is stuff I've actually done. This whole big kind of continent needs to still be modeled. So that's where we are at the current point. So hopefully you've enjoyed this quick tutorial / update video, and I'll be uploading this to the Sky forums fairly soon. I'm not even sure if anybody's watching this, to be frank, but it doesn't really matter. Alright, so until next time, see you. Subscribe to this channel for more videos like this, and also anime reviews and commentary, and game reviews and game commentary. Not reviews, I won't do reviews. Thanks. See you at some other point.